So a big welcome to
Yes.
tonight's free webinar, Supporting the Practice of Being Present. And a big welcome, Bonnie.
No, it's lovely to be here. Good to see you and know all those guys are out there.
For sure. My own name is Liam. I'm the CEO of PCPSI, for those that don't know me. And tonight we have a dual purpose to our free webinar. Firstly, we want to continue to support the integration of last year's training. So if you have any questions, if you want to come on live, we'd love to see people. And also then the second purpose or the second goal is to support anybody that's curious about next year. Next year's training is called The Practice of Being Present, Deepening the Two Pillars of Receptive Presence. And Robert, you might post the link for anybody that's interested in signing up. There's still some spaces available, but Robert tells me that he's after sending out the invites. So we're nearly there next Thursday night, Bonnie. It's very exciting.
Yes, it'll be lovely to be back together again.
Absolutely. And just before I hand over to Bonnie, just a few practicalities. If you have any tech issues, what we suggest is that you log off, log back on, and if the issues still persist, what we suggest is that you send us an email, and our email address is info@pcpsi.ie. Again, there'll be plenty of times for Q&A. As I said earlier, if you want to come on live, please do. You just need to put up your yellow hand function, which is on the reactions. But if you don't want to come on live, feel free to send questions in through the Q&A function. And just a big thank you to Robert, who's in the background, keeping the show on the road. So thanks, Robert.
Yeah.
And just the last thing before I hand over to Bonnie, if anybody wants to get a CPD cert for tonight, Robert will kindly now post the link. Okay, Bonnie, I'm going to hand over to you and you can take over.
Okay, for a while. I know you'll be back and we'll talk more later. So
absolutely. Welcome,
everybody. It's lovely to be here. And this is, for those of you who were with us last year, this is the last of the integration webinars. And for those of you who will just be coming this year, hopefully it'll give a kind of a settling sense, of where we're headed. But before we do that, the practice that we always engage in is a kind of settling, a little meditation that allows us to begin to shift out of whatever we were doing before and kind of just move into being connected to one another as we move ahead and do this talking together and support for one another. So just kind of settling into our bodies. This practice helps us come back to this body, which really is speaking to us at every moment. And as we come back to our bodies, we'll also begin to open to kind of non-judgmentally receiving whatever our body is sharing with us. So we might want to check our neck and shoulders and arms and hands and just see where they'd like to rest right now, most comfortably. And then just inviting our awareness to drop down to our feet and from feet into the earth. Just sensing in whatever way we can this relationship between our bodies, our living bodies, and the living body of the earth that sustains us. And then just resting there for a little bit. And then continuing with earth and feet, we just invite our awareness to also move up our legs and just begin to sense the quality of the muscles there right now. Any areas of relaxation, any areas of tension, not seeking to do anything about it at all, except to just be present and listen as our bodies send all this communication to us through sensation. Now continuing on up to also include our bellies, this belly brain that again has this wondrous way of monitoring our safety. But at the same time, it's also supporting our immune system and digesting relationships as well as food. So much beautiful wisdom there. And so we just arrive and again, listen to how sensation here in this region is speaking to us in this moment. And then we continue up now also to the heart area, the chest, this area that speaks to us about the quality of connection that we're experiencing right in this moment. And then as we continue with earth and feet, legs and muscles, belly, and this heart and chest area, we continue now to add the area around our throat and jaws, and then up around our eyes and forehead. And again, just arriving and sensing what's there right now in this moment. And then we take another moment to just glance upward at the sky. Begin to sense the vastness that's above us and how it's coupled with the solidity below us. And we little humans are held by these resources at every moment of the day. And then with a small shift of attention, just coming to our breath as it is right now, just the flow of the in-breath and the out-breath, not seeking to change it at all, but just following it. And perhaps sensing how we're entangled with all the green things on the earth, that we're just breathing together. Then on the next inhalation, on the exhalation, just inviting our awareness to expand into a bowl of receptivity. And just as best we can in this moment, welcoming whatever's arising in our bodies, whatever might be coming in from the outside, from the environment. And then a little deeper, welcoming all the members of our inner community, perhaps of the ancestors, just depending on how that is for us. And then just holding this welcoming, tender space as best we can in this moment for all of that. Then in this little deeper space where we've arrived, just sensing what might want to arrive spontaneously by way of a word that would hold some small portion of what we have found in here. It might be anything. And then slowly, slowly, we begin to come back here into the outside world and be with each other again. And Robert, if you would make a space for people in chat to bring their words, that would be lovely. So peace, peace, more peace. We could use that for sure. Constriction, love, ease, soothe, connected, smile, letting go, calm, anxiety, embracing it, expectation. Yeah, so much comes with us, and when we begin to go inside, we begin to contact that arriving, letting go, tired. Sometimes that's what we find, isn't it? That we're actually more tired than we know until we get quiet. Strength, trust. All of these ways, here now. Yeah, distracted. I was feeling a little of that myself. Yeah, lovely. I'm always so grateful for this, for our arrival here together, and for a little bit of sharing, so that we sense that even though we can't see each other face to face, we can maybe touch each other heart to heart as we bring these things. So I was feeling a kind of quiet tenderness, but I was also aware of being a little bit distracted as well. I think because today feels really important to me. I'm having the opportunity, Liam and I are, to connect with those of you who were with us through the last year, And those of you who are going on into the new year or joining us for the first time in the new year, and then for people that are just wanting to, to be in connection with this kind of community that holds these particular practices as important. So I feel really, I really want to address all of you in ways that will be, talk with all of you in ways that may be meaningful for you here. Because I know for myself, I'm 20 years in from the beginning of studying relational neuroscience, and I know I'm still moving in the direction of really living into what I've been learning and practicing and moving toward being more that way in the world. As we move into our work with this, there's a slow, deep shift in our perceptual lens that can only happen over time, especially because we're moving in a direction that is so different from what the dominant culture is telling us to do about goals, about success, about how we are to behave, and all of these kinds of things. And then our profession as well, if we're therapists or pretty much whatever we're doing, that tells us that there are these more left hemisphere kinds of ways that are of value. Although I will say I am seeing more and more about the importance of connection and in our lives for our health at every level, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and that the way we're living now has a good chance of killing us physically, so harming our health, and also our precious planet. So there seems to be an awareness growing that we need to move in this direction. And my goodness, if the culture can begin to shift, it's going to make such a difference for each person who lives in it, So I was talking with a friend of mine, Jim Finley, who some of you may know about. He's a spiritual director and a trauma therapist and quite a living elder. And he talks about being a therapist as being present in a way that neither abandons nor invades those who come to us for support. I think that's so important, neither abandons nor invades, finding that sweet spot where we're present. But sometimes we do both. Sometimes we will shift into the left hemisphere if we get scared or if our training tells us that's what we must do. And that's a kind of an abandonment because the circuit of the neural pathways that let us connect aren't there. So there can be a kind of abandonment. And then if out of that we take control and decide what a person needs to do, there's a kind of invasion in that. So sometimes we do both. And I think the more we can become aware of that, the more we can begin to move in a little different direction. So how do we do that? How do we be a presence that neither abandons nor invades? And I think the starting place is cultivating this capacity for non-judgmental receptivity, for being truly present with people without an agenda of, excuse me, I have a little allergies today. I apologize. I may have to clear my throat a few times. But beginning again with this place of receiving people as they are without an agenda, without already thinking ahead of what needs to happen here. And so today, that's what we're going to talk a little bit about, of what we're kind of calling the two pillars of presence. What are the two things that we need to cultivate to get to this place? So in the months between the last class and now, we've really wanted to do these integration webinars so that the busyness of life doesn't stop us from practicing. And then we continue to support one another. Because when we practice, what we're doing is gradually building up again this change in our perceptual lens that lets us live differently. But our culture keeps telling us we have to learn more and more and more, and it produces a kind of indigestion where nothing ever gets fully assimilated and having the chance to really change the way we are inside. So we think about non-judgmental awareness, and it's the foundation of safety. When we welcome people that way, there's a way that their system begins to find a sense of safety that's then the gateway to vulnerability. And that gateway to vulnerability is also the gateway to healing. So there's this wonderful thing that begins to unfold when we just receive our people. And it's become certainly clear to me at my advanced stage that we're never finished with this practice. It's not something that we get to one day and we say, well, I just don't make judgments anymore. We will always have left hemisphere judgments because we'll always have a left hemisphere. So we can begin then to be able to explore how we can meet these judgments that come up and treat them kindly as the allies that they're intending to be. The judgments that we make often are warnings and are seeking to be protectors. So let's say somebody says something that hurts my feelings with just an offhand comment. And then what arises in me is the conviction that they're just being a jerk. So I push them back, I move away from them in an effort to protect myself from them hurting me further. But of course, in the process, I'm also cutting off from my own self. And so I want to then instead cultivate the ability to come back and find that vulnerability in myself, to have a warm curiosity about what might be going on with this person when they are speaking to me that way. What's happening for them? So we begin to be able to soften our own judgments by accepting them as just part of what it is to be a human being. And then maybe think of it even as an ongoing process of rupture and repair that's unfolding within ourselves, you know? It's been so helpful for me to get familiar with what my body feels like in those moments of judgment. And for me, it's a kind of tightening throughout my whole body, but especially in my belly, and a sense of holding back. Almost see my hands want to go over my heart here, like protecting my heart. And what it feels like to move toward warm curiosity, what happens in our bodies when we generously move toward this kind of warm curiosity about what's happening with the other person. So for me, again, it's a feeling like of unveiling my heart, making my heart available, and also my whole body begins to relax. So I'm imagining over the course of my lifetime, I get to do this at least 1,000,000 times, you know, when a judgment arises and I notice it. I'm sure I don't even notice it some of the times, you know, but when I do notice it, then this willingness to kind of sit with it and see if I can sense why the judgment was needed. How was it protecting me? And then moving a little more into warm curiosity toward this person. So about doing that over and over and over again, we build up a way that it becomes something Dan Siegel talks about. It goes from being a state of mind to gradually being a trait of who we are. And that's when we know that perceptual lens has been nurtured long enough to really change and begin to just be the way we walk around in the world most of the time. Nobody's going to be there 100%, right? We always have to remember in our relationships, we get that strong, clear connection on the first try about 33% of the time. All the rest is rupture and repair, and that every repair builds more hope that we will be able to stay connected. Ruptures followed by repairs build not only resilience in us, but build the confidence that all of our relationships, not all of them, but the relationships where we can do that, will be able to be strengthened by them. Because I really feel that, you know, I have an upset with somebody and we're able to talk it through and be warm and caring and interested with each other. Then we get to have this wonderful experience of having more confidence that this relationship can always find repair. So that's my hope for all of you who were here last year, and all of you who have been following this path for a long time, is that we continue to work with this and build up again these new neural pathways that support this kind of perception, this kind of generous, kind, tender, healing perception with one another, not just in the therapy room, but everywhere in our lives. So in the new class, which starts this Thursday, and this part of it that I'm going to talk about actually is on Saturday, but for the first time, except in small groups in our living room in Vancouver, we're going to be able to practice together each month for 2 hours on Saturday. And I'm so excited about this. So we'll have panels, as most of you probably know, and those panels and I will work together to just be together and see what wants to unfold about whatever it is they're bringing. And we'll get to practice like this. So whether you are somebody who's chosen to be on a panel or whether you're going to be witnessing the process online, I'm going to ask you all to participate by listening to what is unfolding inside of you as the panel goes through its process. And I want to encourage all of you to bring supplies for non-dominant hand drawing and collage, maybe writing things in case poetry comes to you. It could be clay, but whatever part of this experiential world that we've been exploring, that whatever that would be there to support you, so that while the panel is doing its work and sharing, you can see in this visual kind of way or tactile kind of way what's happening inside of you. And then you can either join us and share that, or you can share it with your listening partner afterwards, over the next, sometime during the next month, to talk 1, 2, or 3 times with this listening partner and be able to share what it is that arose for you. It's really true that the work of one is the work of all. I mean, I've heard that probably since grad school. And I think over time, I've gotten to appreciate how true that is if we make conditions such that rather than trying to analyze what's going on when, say, this panel is working together, that instead we're really mindful of our bodies, just the way we did when in our meditation, like what's unfolding in my body, how's my heart and chest, how are my muscles, what's happening, say, up in my jaws, and all this kind of thing. To really begin to really practice listening inside is so building again of this different way of being in the world. So anyway, we want everybody to participate. That's really the most important piece of all of this. Because I think if we're really, really honest with ourselves, non-judgmental presence without agenda is really, really challenging. Almost nothing in the culture supports us being this way in our day-to-day life. So we really need the support of each other through a listening partnership or a listening group. I know some of you have formed listening groups, and it's wonderful. The feedback that we get from how much this is deepening this kind of inner transformation to being really available to people when we get to do it with others in a regular way. So we need that support, but we also need the support of the second pillar that we're going to be talking about. And that second pillar has to do with learning about relational neuroscience in a way that then supports our awareness of what's happening. So much about being able to offer this space of receptivity is about nurturing a particular kind of relationship between the hemispheres. And so in our new class on Thursdays, we're going to be having an hour to talk in a more cognitive, thinking about it kind of way about this. And this will be the topic for this coming Thursday, is how do we nurture, what is it, and how do we nurture this kind of relationship between the hemispheres? And then we get to practice on Saturday. So it brings up the question that I hear so many people ask, relational neuroscience is hard. I don't like science. It's really difficult. Why should I bother? Why should I do this? Why can't I just be with people? And of course you can. But what we have found so often in the supervision groups and consultation groups is that as we learn these things, our level of steadiness with our people really, really grows. Because for our right hemispheres to practice such radical openness as we're talking about, as being here with non-judgmental presence and without the support of any kind of an agenda, which is usually more for us than it is for our client, we need to have this kind of stabilizing force of what Ian McGilchrist calls our left hemisphere emissary. Because when we open to whatever is going to happen next, without trying to control the situation, we are vulnerable to whatever is emerging in our people that can then bring it forward in us. So our people might be bringing their tears, they might be bringing their anger, their shame, their jealousy, their dissociation, their stories of horrifying abuse. It could be anything that comes in when we are just making a space for that. And maybe right now, as we talk about this, of being that open to whatever is going to come in, we can feel what that would be like in our bodies to welcome that. I'm sure it can feel really, really good, but there's also this kind of edgy place where, will my system be able to hold this? Or do I feel like I need to try to control something a little bit more? But if we don't have a pretty firm foundation of understanding the meaning of what is emerging and the bigger picture of how all this unfolds in us humans, we can become anxious, and then adaptively we may move to take control, which means shifting into the left hemisphere. And then we're up in that territory we were talking about before, where that shift into the left hemisphere can be felt as a kind of abandonment by our people. And then we're coming up with some some process that we want to do with them that's coming from us, not coming from what they're eliciting, but just coming from us. And so then there's that invading kind of quality of like, I think we should do this. So it's a big deal. Like, it can be subtle, it can be unseen, but it's a big deal to open into this radical openness to things and then have our own system touched in all of these ways. And the wonderful thing for me was to hear from my interns, and this was pretty early on. You know, I had just been fortunate enough to be with Dan Siegel for maybe a couple, 3 years by then. And we were talking regularly now in our supervision group about these processes. And my interns, my wonderful interns, were telling me that they were finding that their anxiety about being in the room and being open to people was diminishing by at least 50%. And this is when I wasn't able to bring much at all yet, but just certain pieces about how the nervous system works or what might be happening when someone dissociates, that it isn't a negative thing at all. It's actually this wonderful way of protection. And as I was learning more about this, I could watch their bodies relax in supervision. And then they were telling me that relaxation was following them into the therapy room. So it's good for our people. It's really good for us too, to take the time and the energy to go back over this, you know, any number of times until we begin to feel it coming into our bodies. Because that's the kind of whole learning we want. We want to have left hemisphere clarity about what is this autonomic nervous system, or what is it to have disconfirming experiences in the implicit? How can I understand that? And then as we understand it more and more, we begin to see it everywhere in ourselves and others, and it begins to be embodied. And that's when it begins to be this wonderful gift that comes into the counseling room with us. I really remember some of my early experiences as a therapist when things would wake up. I was, I was like probably 49, 50 years old when I was really stepping into this, but I was still in the heat of my own therapy. So when I would be with people, there was so much that could be touched and awakened by what was awakening in them. So I realized that there were times when I was stepping in to shape the process in order to protect myself from it being too much for me, to regulate me in some way. That usually took the form of wanting them to work harder, oddly enough, because that was the pattern in my own therapy. You know, get out the pick and shovel, dig in and work really hard. So if they were going more slowly, I would find that was upsetting for me. So I would do that. But there were other times when big emotions would come in the room and I could feel myself begin to get a little foggy and dissociating a little bit, you know, just not all the way out, but just not really quite fully there. So what happened next when I was experiencing that in California, you're a trainee and then you're an intern and then eventually you get licensed. So back in my trainee years, I was still in school, and my supervisor was wonderful, because the thing that happened next when I would bring this to him, that I realized that I was getting agitated and sometimes dissociating a little bit, or feeling like I had to grab onto the process in some way. My supervisor listened to me without any judgment and told me that those kinds of protective activations were just my system responding in the way that happens to all therapists throughout their career, and that nothing bad was happening. And that these were guideposts to what still needed healing in me, which is also a lifelong process. And then sitting with me so that I could begin to sense what had been touched in me. And of course, this is what we're going to be doing with our panels. And then I could take that to my therapist. So in other words, he was telling me that nothing bad had happened when I had these experiences. And I feel so remarkably fortunate to have had this particular person as my first supervisor, because he really let me settle into being able to be completely honest with him about what was going on, and then sitting with me so that we could move through the arc of my own healing, so that I became more and more able to offer that kind of holding to people, to really receive them. So his name was Dave Brokaw, and he was a remarkable help to me. So that was the first piece for me in this developing, was being received in this non-judgmental way, so that I could feel like I was just being a human being, and that there was a way that this could be, again, a support in the healing that was unfolding inside of me. And then a few years after that, I was introduced to interpersonal neurobiology through Dan Siegel back in 2003. For 5 years in that study group, we went over the same principles month in and month out. And I think Dan despaired of us ever really getting it. But the repetition began to settle my inner world and my body, because this information was gradually integrating. I was getting a clearer left hemisphere understanding, but I was also noticing throughout the day. I think I drove my family crazy because something would happen. I'd go, I think that's what just happened. So I don't know that they were so happy about it. But for me, I began to see these things unfolding in others and in myself. And then over time, there gradually grew this feeling where I could truly experience, not just believe it in my head, but truly experience that whatever was happening was exactly what needed to happen, even when I couldn't make sense of it in a linear way. That there is a way that the wisdom of the system in the other person, even when things looked difficult, frightening, or whatever, was in a way made perfect sense to the inner world of this person. And that if I could be with it, we could find our way through to some kind of unfolding that would really be helpful. But getting to that point of trust in my own and other people's systems had steps along the way. So we begin by learning about kind of these discrete systems. Maybe we study the autonomic nervous system and the belly brain and the seeking system and the limbic system and the two hemispheres. Maybe we think a lot about what happens when trauma is in bed and how implicit memory of trauma can change. Maybe we think about what relational science neuroscience has to say about how inner communities form. So we're learning all these different pieces, and by the repetition of them, we begin to get left hemisphere clarity. And then that has a natural way of beginning to move over into the experience, so that we find ourselves commenting on our own inner world and what we see going around us from this viewpoint. So repetition is the most important thing. I often say, I think I probably had to hear something 50 times before it began to really embody in me. So that's my hope, is that you guys had listening partners from last year still doing this with each other, that you're sitting together and you're studying together and you're talking about how it comes alive in your daily life. And I hope all of you coming in for next year will have, some of you maybe have a listening partner from last year and are coming into this year, but those of you who don't, I know I think it's on the Facebook page, Robert will correct me if I'm wrong about that there's a way to connect with a listening partner if one doesn't just come naturally to you, if you don't have one right now. It's so valuable to do that. Because after a while, as we talk about these separate systems, we do begin to get the sense of how they all operate together, that you can't just know about one or the other without understanding how it's influencing everything else that's going on. And so it seems to me that there's some kind of alchemy that begins to happen as we repeat these things. And then that broader trust begins to really emerge. So the more, when we talk about the relationship between the two hemispheres, the more we're both studying and experiencing, the more the two hemispheres begin to find their way toward one another, so that the right hemisphere is in the lead, the right hemisphere that lets us be in the moment and open and receptive to whatever's going to happen next. But as it's doing that, it's resting on this firmer and firmer foundation of this left hemisphere knowing about how these things happen. And then we begin to become steadier. And as we become steadier, there's such a sense that there's only adaptation and no pathology. And with that comes this deepening of widening compassion and ever widening receptivity. And it just kind of comes on, as we repeat these processes over and over again. The integration of this material that we're learning along with our own experience of it and our own healing automatically allow the brain to move, our two hemispheres to move into the configuration that's most natural to them when they aren't having to be rearranged because of trauma. And I mean personal trauma, but also cultural trauma and historical trauma and epigenetic trauma, all of these layers that we carry. So the more those are relieved, the more we begin to be able to offer this beautiful thing to people around us. And again, not just our clients, our kids, our partners, the stranger that we meet, you know, in the store that's having a tough day, and we see them and they feel it. They feel the felt sense of our noticing. So anyway, I think that that's the biggest part, you know, this is the path, this is the foundation. And so I wonder how those of you from last year are coming along with your integrative process, and also if there's any questions or thoughts about the year ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Bonnie. There's been a few comments as well about the Facebook group, and if anybody needs information on the Facebook group, please contact Mary. Mary's at mary@pcpsi.ie. And Mary will give you all the information. Okay, and we have a few people looking to come on. So Robert, when you get a chance, could you bring on Mark and Gabriella, please?
This gives us a moment again to pause and kind of just be here, you know. Hi, Mark. Hi, Gabriella.
Hi there.
Mark, what do you bring?
Me first, yeah.
Yes.
Well, I'm beginning to feel reassured by tonight. I did the course last year. I was on with you. I think I asked a question in the middle of it because I was really struggling with my own personal therapy and the college work. And someone had asked a question about the demands of the academic college training, counseling. And I just finished third year. I know you'd advised taking time out, and I didn't feel I could, but I really struggled this past year. I got into a level of distress with the assignments that I began to see was very much in the trauma field, which was reassuring after a while that I wasn't failing. And I have decided to defer a year, particularly with this year coming up. And I really feel I can't take any more information in. And I was beginning to kind of panic that all of the work from last year that we did and all the papers and all the neuroscience, that I'm getting into a pattern that I'm falling behind and I'll never catch up.
No.
And I'm so glad that I've decided to defer the year and just focus on this side. But I definitely, I even did a wee spreadsheet because I know my left hemisphere needs to know, just to see all of the topics and because I found a lot of stuff came up for me through those classes. I cried for half of them because stuff started coming up.
Yes.
So I suppose the question, I've great listening partners and we've kept together.
Oh, fabulous.
That's been great. So I am beginning to trust, but I guess the question is, like, there's now a part of me that's going, I don't have to know all of this stuff. Like it's going to take years. When you said at the end about spending all those years repeating, it was reassuring. But yeah, for me, it's like, can I start to trust, when you would invite us through the year to say, don't worry about taking notes and just I find it really hard to just just listen and don't worry and just let what's coming up. So I think that's kind of my question, and that shifting into right and trusting. Is that a question? I don't know, but
No, I think I hear what you're saying, Mark, and I think that again, when we talk about cultural trauma and academic trauma, Steve Porges talks all the time about how university training is inherently traumatic because of the competition and the push and the emphasis on the left hemisphere, the disconnection to our bodies, to the disconnection from our individuality. Everybody's supposed to do it the same, and that judge that by who got the A in the class, kind of thing. And it is deeply inhuman. So I'm glad you're going to take a year And again, I think the most important thing with all of this is to know that you do not have to get it all at once. And that if something's really, like, let's say you get really kind of taken by the way trauma embeds and the way implicit memory heals, like that's a topic that really grabs you, you can probably know that that has something to do that you need to hear personally, and something that is going to really benefit your people down the road as you move into this. And so stay there for a while. And if we're going ahead and talking about inner community, don't worry about it. You'll get you'll get a little, and that's fine. But we have to deepen into these kinds of things. You know, I've been exposed to Steve Porges's work probably for at least 15 years now. And I feel like every time I go back to it, either because I'm going to talk about it, or I've got to write about it, or I just feel called to it, I deepen into it. So my handouts have changed over the years from a more clunky kind of thing into something that looks more like a river, because my understanding of it is changing and deepening. So it is about years and years and years. And I'm sure, you know, till I can't think anymore, or whatever happens to me, that I will continue to be deepening into and growing into these things. But the culture doesn't support that. And I think that's the tension you're feeling.
Yeah, in a way, I'm great. Even though I knew I couldn't go on another day, really, I knew it had to stop. I couldn't go through it anymore. But even when I'm listening to you now, I'm kind of grateful for it, because it brought up such pain from school, from the church, from home, from everything that, you know, in the depth of the shame, you don't see it, but when I do get regulated, or I can share with the listening partner, I can see, oh, this is coming up to be healed. But I don't have access to that sometimes in the moment. And that's so useful for, I mean, at the same time, I feel that the work with the clients, there was, in a way, all I took from last year was when you retold from the handout the story of the sand tray and the woman who said, I'm going to get it wrong. And I cried when I read that first time. I went, that was me. And I remember writing it down when you said, if you'd been in your left hemisphere and said, you can't get it wrong, you would be missing what was happening. And that was the protector was coming up, and our protectors haven't been heard and haven't been honored. And I realized that's all I needed from last year. What more, what a profound thing to learn, and to trust that that's it. It's not, you know, just the barrage of information. So thank you so much, because I try when I'm working, I'm only in my training hours, but working with the clients, it's just I just come back to that presence. Am I here? And your words come up, and your presence actually comes up a lot. And
I'm delighted by that.
Yeah. And I feel it in the room. I feel it in the room, and I know I'm on the right track. So thank you so much. And I'm so grateful for having this here.
Well, I am really grateful that you came back this time to talk again about it as well, Mark. And I have the same experience when I'm doing therapy. The people that have nurtured me come up inside of me. So we don't have to do it alone. And that makes all the difference, because we're asked to carry so much on behalf of our people, you know. So that's lovely. That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Oh, Gabriella. Hi.
Bonnie. Hi. So I have been swimming in this field for a number of years now, and with you for a handful of years, and I'm so grateful to be continuing on. It's been game-changing, and my question that I bring here today is sort of what got me onto this path. Was one of my younger brothers had a car accident and has a traumatic brain injury from 10 years ago. And it's a diffuse axonal injury, which basically 97% of people that have that, either they don't recover or they're inanimate. So he is of the 3 percentile that is, from the outside, he looks great, but the inside, it's a global brain injury, but it's mostly centered in his corpus callosum. And so through being part of his healing journey, I started learning about the brain because I never even thought about my brain. And then my husband and I brought him to a brain injury rehab in Provo, Utah, that used all these phenomenal technologies, which really inspired me around what's possible. So that's kind of what led me on. But my question here is, so my brother grew up in the same, terrifying alcoholic home that I did. He had his own host of complex trauma experiences that were complexly traumatic for him before the accident. And since then, he lives in the state of Maine for 10 years. He's on disability. There's nobody around him. And, my father has cast him as dead, told him he would have been better off if he got killed. And another brother that blamed him, for the accident, won't talk to him. So the family is very fractured. So I'm the only person that is his safe person. And so he lives alone with his kitty. And I could feel, for the first few years of his accident, I could feel in my implicit system so much of an urgency to help him. And through this work, it's really continuing to help me regulate so I can just be a safe space for him. And empathically, when I tune into his isolation and aloneness day in, day out, I have him in therapy once a week. I have him doing neurofeedback once a week. I have him working with a cranial sacral therapist every couple of weeks and chiropractic. So these are his resources of safe people, more or less. But other than that, he has no human contact. Mm-hmm. And I know how many intergenerational protectors our family has around aloneness. And this is exponentially increased in him because of the traumatic brain injury and PTSD, that isn't processed. So I'm like, I feel the burden and the beauty of being able to be like, the one human that can really like check in with him every day and attune to him and be with him. And also there's always that feeling of like, what more can I do? What direction can I point him in? Because to me, his reality feels intolerable. And he's not suicidal and he's never expressed that, but he describes that he's dangerously depressed and things like this. And I'm just curious if you have any insight or direction or anything, when we're dealing with trauma, but also traumatic brain injury.
Right. Well, it's a lot. I mean, my heart goes out to you both. I really can feel that, with you, the weight of childhood, the weight of the accident, the weight of the response to the accident, and all of that. And I don't know what kind of resources there are around him in terms of groups, in terms of groups of people struggling with brain injury. I imagine, it sounds to me like you have looked at every single resource.
Yeah. That I'm aware of.
That you're aware of, and that I don't know that that sounds, what a beautiful group of resources, though, if these people are really able to offer, the kind of stillness that craniosacral work brings, gives the body the opportunity to find its way to health. That's the whole point of craniosacral, is you have it in you, whatever. I realize he's got an injury that is going to continue to influence him no matter what, it sounds like. Mm-hmm. But that within that, whatever health can come forward, a cranial person will help with that. Chiropractor, I think chiropractic mostly, has the same way of approaching people. And then with therapy and all of that, I don't think probably there's anything that I can think of in addition, except to give you some ease if possible, so that it isn't also wearing you down so much, Gabriella. I hear the blessing and I hear the searching, and maybe it's helpful to take a breath and let it go with what the support that he has for a while, and let your system settle. You can be most benefit to him when your system can also settle. And I really hear that you've done a beautiful job of assembling community, but here's a man with legitimate grief of all sorts, and particularly that this is not the life he pictured for himself, whatever that was. This is not it. And it doesn't seem like it is ever going to be that.
Right. Because I can feel like when I feel the depths of his grief and loneliness and isolation and rage around all of that, that almost becomes intolerable for me. So then I want to help and, fix it. So, and
well, who's your support?
Mhm.
Who's your support? That's the other thing that seems really important, is that when you feel that intolerableness of this situation, who do you turn to?
I mean, that's a good question, because I certainly find, I have my own therapy and my own support, but it's usually for other things. And, my husband to a degree, but I think that's a good question that I could feel into, specific to this, because it's not my family. And so that is a good question, and that I can sort of look at more directly, that can hold the inherent health that is here, but also the grief of, we live in a world that's not set up for traumatic brain injury sensitivity or awareness.
No, and that when we are in the presence of ongoing tragedy like this,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't seem like it's going to be different. It's not going to be dramatically different, perhaps. Maybe something will happen. But, it is really hard to carry that every day. It's very different than if somebody's life is somewhat okay now and we're working with past things,
Right.
and it is when there's an ongoing trauma that does not seem like it's going to change substantially, and we feel so much love and concern for the person. It's absolutely vital that we have places where we can be with our own grief about the tragedy.
That's a really important distinction. Yeah. And I'm aware my left hemisphere was like, Bonnie will know if there's a gadget or a device or a thing that will help. and yeah. And I say that jokingly, but I really hear it is an honoring of his path, and also what will help me sort of be in that bowl of non-judgmental receptivity, because I do judge his experience, not him, but the circumstances that he's in, as enduringly painful, like just ongoingly painful. And so
it doesn't seem like he feels like he can move toward more engagement with people.
No, he goes to the grocery store just for like social interaction, just to like have the teller, check him out. Right. And it's really, it just like, it breaks my heart. Mm-hmm.
Well, I wish there was some kind of group available for him with other people that are struggling in this way. That's the only other thing I know to really be helpful for people, is people in similar circumstances,
Yeah, well, if there's anyone here in our body of listeners that know anything about that, please find Liam, and Liam will find me, or however that works. Yes. Thank you for your listening, Bonnie. And I'm looking forward to this year ahead.
Me too. Good to see you. Yeah.
Thank you. Likewise.
Okay, Bonnie, unfortunately, we're out of time. All good things come to an end. Do you want to say anything before we finish?
Well, just that, as always, it's so touching to me to be with, people that come on, and I'm always grateful for that, to have people, engage with this so that we can talk about it in, real daily life terms. So thank you, Mark and Gabriella, for doing that. It's really helpful.
Okay. Thanks, Bonnie. And I hope to see everybody again next Thursday. And as I said at the start, the invites have gone out. So if you didn't get an invite, please make contact with Mary and she'll sort her out. So Bonnie, I look forward to seeing you next Thursday, and we'll get the show on the road.
Yes, I will. Absolutely. All right. I will see you then, my friend, and see you.
Until then, take care.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Robert. Bye.
Thanks, Robert. Bye.